I'll officially welcome you to Words, Images, and Worlds. And for anybody out there that's listening out in the Zoomverse and YouTube and Spotify and Amazon and Apple and whatever else is out there, um, I am delighted on this episode to be talking with creator and educator, Kane Lynch.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the immersive background space as well. This is a very cool vibe. I'm really enjoying that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I like to create the impression of that I'm just in an infinite cartoon world.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So we were just talking about the fact that you teach comics, and when I'm writing about teaching, once I get tired of using the word teacher, I start using educator. So they're pretty synonymous to me.
Yeah, that's
It works pretty well. I'll mention a couple of titles, and of course, you're welcome to mention any others as well. So, Smooth as Glass is one of those, and I also know that you have contributed to the anthology Guantanamo Voices as well. I was practicing the word Guantanamo before I just said it as well. Any other salient major works that folks should be aware of out there?
I think those are probably the most salient from the last few years. And then my upcoming book next year from Scholastic Graphics is called Real Life.
Love it, love it. Yes, yes, absolutely. Big fan of Scholastic Graphics and the work they do in getting books that are appealing to a wide range of readers and pretty available. So looking forward to that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that one of my like rants that I've been trying to articulate where I'm like, should I like actually like pitch this as an essay to someone or something is like most of the history of American comics, like the giants of the field were people making comics for children,
Hmm.
whether
Hmm.
that's, I don't know, Harvey Kurtzman or Charles Schultz or take your pick of whoever your favorite happens to be. And so it's kind of funny to me that I feel like people who will champion historical kids comics don't seem very interested in the current crop of kids comics, even though that
Yeah.
is such a flourishing of the medium right now, where I think a lot of the best work is being done.
Agreed, agreed. And somebody was asking me recently what I kind of thought the direction of comics might be, and I said, well, there are these really interesting literary things happening, and of course, we're always going to have whatever superhero book is popular, but the work that's being done in comics for like upper elementary, middle grades, and young adult right now is just super, super interesting. It really is.
Yeah, I think that's the people who aren't reading those books are missing out because they are
Yeah.
just some of the best comics being made, in my opinion.
Agreed. Agreed. Absolutely. How did you enter this space? I'm literally picturing you like opening a door and stepping into the comics room that you're in right now. How did you get into this comic space?
Into comics in general or into middle grade comics specifically?
Oh, I was thinking like that origins question of like what captured you about the medium.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to remember that when I was in the age bracket of the kids I'm now doing a book for, I started drawing comics and I really drew them before I read them.
Hmm.
And I had this experience where my parents had recently split up, and when I would come home from school, and it was just my mom there, and it would be there's just like not a positive energy in the house at the time, which isn't. I don't want to blame anyone in particular for. It's just a hard thing we were all going through.
Hmm.
And I had drawn some comics at recess and lunch at school, and I showed them to my mom, and she was just like dying laughing at these comics that I made. And it was kind of stunning to me. It was just like this thing that I drew just completely changed the energy.
Yeah.
Um, and so after that, I really was just kind of like in love with the medium. I had certain preferences or what have you, but I was like, great, I'm going to the comic store, I'm reading Superman and Batman, and I really loved Aquaman. I feel like I was the only 90s kid who was, like if like everyone my age is like, oh, did you read like Youngblood and Spawn? Like, no, that's all about Aquaman, sorry.
Oh, hey, that
And
was he had the cool look, the hook hand, all the things. Yeah.
yeah, it was basically just like this Peter David Aquamans were basically like a soap opera in Atlantis, and I was here for it.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but then I also was, my parents were both, I suppose this was normal in the 90s, less so now, but they were both subscribers to multiple newspapers. So I could compare the Sunday section in our local paper, the Tribune, versus the LA Times. So I'm from the Central Coast of California. And yeah, the way that what the same strip would be, the LA Times would have the full like three-tier version, and the local paper would have the truncated two-tier version, and
Mhm.
seeing how that read differently and that sort of thing. And then when I was a little older, like middle school, early high school, I sort of had an awareness that like there's more to movies than the movies that we all love when we're 9 years old, right? And when
Mhm.
I think that was an age where I started being able to appreciate, and like we'd go to like the art house theater, and I'd see some European film or something, or some indie darling, and get excited about it. And I thought like, well, is there something like this for comics? Because the comics I'm reading are Superman and Snoopy or what have you.
Mhm.
And my path to discovering those was that I saw Understanding Comics at Barnes and Noble when I was maybe 13. And I knew who Scott McCloud was because he wrote the Superman Adventures comic
Yep.
based on
Mhm.
the Bruce Timm show. And so I was like, oh, I know who that guy is. I'll read this book. And from that book, I discovered Jason Lutz and other creators that kind of broadened my understanding of the medium. And I specifically was attracted to artists that had a little bit of like a cartoony style, but were dealing with more complex issues. I think before that, I thought maybe comics for adults, like this is a weird kid brain thing, but I was like, they must have lots of cross hatching. Like that's it's going to be really the art's going to be like more complicated. Like how an adult novel has more words in it, an adult comic must have like more lines.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, yeah, I absolutely love some art that is cross-hatching heavy, but it was a kind of a revelatory thing to me to realize that you could do something that is extremely cartoony to tell a very like complex and nuanced kind of story.
Mhm.
And I've basically just been trying to do that ever since.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. The deeper the complexity, the more the cross-hatching right there.
Yeah.
I probably read into it something like that too. Just because of growing up and seeing like, oh, those are Conan books and those are very like there are themes in there, but then I was also a person that got introduced to Scott McCloud through Superman Adventures as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I really was attracted to that simplicity. Like this is I don't know if this is too much of a detour, but like I tried reading HP Lovecraft around that age, and I really did not like it because I was like, you're just putting in extra words.
Right.
The story is just there's a sleepy squid. You didn't need all those words. And then like, 15 years later, I reread those same stories. And I'm like, that's what makes this fun. Is just the like over the topness of this prose, and that's not a
Yeah.
barrier anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as you're creating and what you'd like to share in your work, how do comics kind of allow you to do that?
Yeah, I think something I like to say sometimes is that I think in words and feel in pictures.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, just as a working cartoonist who has to hustle to keep the lights on, I'll often take random illustration gigs or what have you. And something I've struggled with occasionally is that like if someone wants me to do something that is kind of like giving a friendly feeling to factual information, like I am there, and that's really a positive experience for me. So like right now I'm working with a math professor, Joe Buller, who I think my role in her operation is basically to make the concepts feel like friendly and accessible. And like this isn't like the way you tense up when you hear math. These like fun
Hmm.
cartoon lines are helping get you past that. But infographics are something that people often want to hire cartoonists to do. And maybe I shouldn't be on the record saying this, but like that's I think when I've done it, I've been fine at it, but it's not intuitive to me because I'm like, I would rather read like a paragraph about inflation than look at like a cool, colorful chart about inflation. Because when I'm trying to
Right.
intellectually understand something, like the words are my best way of processing that. But the pictures are giving it that sort of like human or subjective quality, which
Hmm.
often is what we need. Um, so I think that is the sort of like fundamental thing that compels me about comics is that it is such a perfect marriage of those two things. And yeah, there certainly are other mediums where that's also true. I've also made films, and I enjoy that world a lot too.
Hmm.
But um, film is like I guess the good thing, the bad thing about it is that like film is very collaborative, and comics are more or less singular. Of course, you could have a team making a comic, and I suppose if you really want to, you can make a film on your own. But the sort of like default state of them is that a comic is one person's vision, perhaps with some help, and a
Hmm.
film
Hmm.
is like it's a let's all put on a show kind of energy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so when you're just like, there's a story in my head and I want to tell it, it almost never occurs to me to just write prose. But I'm like, well, what's the way that I could make this a tangible thing in the world? And comics is the easiest way. Not that it's easy, but
Yeah.
uh, and the other thing is that I love to draw, and when I used to be a video editor, and I feel like I could make things that I enjoyed, but I don't particularly love just moving clips around all day. Again,
Hmm.
happy to
Hmm.
do it. Someone's listening to this and wants to hire me to do it, that'd be great. But just making little pictures all day is just like such a joy for me. And so even if it's extremely long work days with no weekends when I'm grinding on a project or something, it's still like just truly something I love doing.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're working, and I suppose when you have the creative opportunity, how do you kind of select the themes, the ideas that you want to explore?
I feel like I'm not thinking about themes first. It's usually that like a story is kind of like forming in my head in some way, and there's some
Yeah.
element of like a combination of personal experience and inventing characters that kind of like combines into something. Though there are times when like this book that I'm working on now, real life, I felt like I started trying to develop it in 2020, and I did feel like a self-consciousness about this story that felt very like small potatoes and like introverted, sad kid when it felt like the world was collapsing. And I tried to sort of think about themes that I was seeing in the world. And I'm not sure how much to go into that without talking about the specifics of the book, but that
Hmm.
like people not being able to connect with each other or projecting a lot of strange motivations on each other that didn't seem to be borne out by the facts.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
things that are like, you could use that to be talking about politics or world events or what have you, but also, yeah, I think politics is like kind of a grand version of the sort of awkwardness and sometimes cruelty of individual human interactions, So
Yeah.
I don't think anyone is going to like read this book and it will like radically change their politics or something. It's not that kind of book, but I was like finding that sort of like thematic resonance in the world around me and what I was going to be spending all day doing.
Yeah, yeah. But I love that you point out that you don't start with a theme because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a teacher, and it seems like the ultimate thing that we look for when we're teaching English is like, oh, what's the theme? But the point that I try to get across to readers, to the students that are reading in the class is, hey, there's not one singular theme, and uh, often authors don't really start with that. I mean, I don't know authors that get up and go, I'm going to write a story today about perseverance. That's usually not, that might be part of it, but not
Yeah.
necessarily.
And it's hard to universalize that, I suppose, because there is I just finished watching White Lotus, and the creator
Uh-huh.
of that was talking about how he did pick like, okay, the theme of the first season is, I can't remember what it was now. I think the first season was money, and the second season was sex, and the third season will be death. He really did
Oh,
start
yes.
with
Hmm.
that's the lodestar that's gonna like unite all these stories. And that show does feel impressively thematically integrated to me because of that.
True, true.
Um, and if you follow like kind of a lot of the guidance from like screenwriting, there is often an idea of like you have like a theme that is stated early in the story and then it's tested by the story.
Hmm.
And so I suppose I did play with that a bit, but it wasn't kind of in my head how it came together. And really, I'm feeling like I enjoy taking apart stories the way you would in an English class, and I feel like there's kind of a funny joy in doing that to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I started recognizing like, oh, I have like multiple scenes in this story where someone says something that slams the door. It's like, is that me being lazy that I always have this same beat, or is there something actually kind of like either like just metaphorically interesting about that, or just as kind of like a parallelism that this just keeps happening, you know? Like, is it something that once you're aware of it, do you try to tweak it, or do you lean into it, or eschew it? And yeah, I feel like those English class skills are really applicable, just maybe not in such a kind of straightforward way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as much as I want to talk about White Lotus season three, because I'm dreadfully curious, um, that is a good moment for us to also talk about the work you do as an educator, advocating for the medium and sharing about comics. So, anything that you'd like to share on that?
Sure, yeah. I started teaching comics when I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my friend Kara Goldstein is kind of like has like a mini empire of comics teaching there, and so
Hmm.
I was invited by her to help teach one of her summer kids workshops. And at the time, I was super nervous about it because I hadn't spent a lot of time around kids that age. I think this was maybe 6 to 10 year olds or something like that. And I was literally like, what if they just like all pee their pants? What do I do? I do not
Yeah,
know what to
yeah.
do here. I have twin sisters who are about to turn 14. So now I have more experience with kids at different ages, but this was around when they were born. So not so much. And then I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies,
Yes, yeah.
and one of the things that I learned the most from there was teaching kids. So I worked with some other cartoonists that were really incredible, especially Lydia Wen and Daryl Sachek, and we would kind of have to come up with these cartooning activities for kids very quickly because we had a lot of work for on our own comics, and then figure out how to. Uh, just create activities that were different enough to be interesting, but it was like it needed to have enough variety where it wasn't just the same thing every time, but also it couldn't be built on the assumption that a kid had gone to every one of these classes because it was a
Mhm.
monthly class and you just paid each time you went. So we had kids that would come every time, or we would have like a group of 20, that's probably too many, a group of 10 homeschoolers from rural New Hampshire that would like be driven by their Amish looking teacher there. And it was like, all right, so these kids are going to have a very different experience from this kid who has like come to every single one of these. Um, and we managed to get pretty ambitious with it some of the time, and it was really fun. But then when I moved to Portland, Oregon after that, and I got a gig doing after school classes. Um, and that was interesting because when it started, I was like, I've got this. I've done this a million times. And I designed an activity that was very similar to what I had done in Vermont. And it didn't work. Like they were just like, I'm not interested in this. And I thought about it and was like, well, I think some people in that situation were just like, this is pearls before swine. These kids don't know what they're missing.
Right, right.
I was like, there's a path here. What is it? And part of it was that what they were competing against, or what I was competing against rather, was outdoor activities because it was an after school program at a school. So it's like, do you want to go outside on this beautiful sunny day and play soccer with all your friends? Or do you want to sit in the lunchroom at a table with some weird adult and draw comics? And yeah, there are always going to be kids who are great at drawing comics, who do it on their own all the time. And as a teacher, you get to feel very accomplished because you didn't have to do very much. You're like, draw a comic about a boat on the moon, and the kid just busted out.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you can focus on that kid, feel great about yourself. But what about those other kids who are struggling, or in this case, we're just piecing out? So first I asked them what they were interested in. and several of them said Dogman, and one of them just
Mhm.
said, "I only want to draw Dogman." And for those of you who don't know, Dogman is a series by Dave Pilkey that's one of the biggest comics in the country for I'd say like the younger end of middle grade readers, and they're
Mhm.
really friggin' funny.
They are.
Um, and I was like, okay, what else you got? What do you like? What would you like drawing stuff about? Just give me anything. And this kid said go-kart racing. And I don't know if he was like really into Mario Kart or this is Portland, Oregon. Maybe his family made like artisanal go-karts. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I was like, okay, Dogman, go-kart racing. What can I do? So I checked some Dogman books out of the library. Which incidentally, I feel like whenever people are like, "Oh, I haven't read that kind of comic. I don't know if I'd like it." Get it from the library. Your library probably
Absolutely.
has it. You know,
Yes, yes.
having fun isn't hard when you have a library card. And so I read some Dogman, and I didn't want to copy it, but I wanted to sort of get a sense of the kind of humor and the art style and what about it was appealing to these kids. And I realized that part of the appeal is that the art is very accessible. Like the narrative conceit of Dogman is that the kids in Captain Underpants have drawn this comic.
Mhm.
So, you know, to my eye, it is pretty obvious the ways that it is not drawn by a kid, but I think to a kid you can kind of like buy into that idea, right? You're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
kids do this. I could draw this. And I imagine most of them literally don't think the kids drew it, but it's an idea that sparks joy. So I tried to like simplify the art, and then I wanted to create a story where they wanted to participate in it and had to kind of holistically use comic skills to do it. Um, because another problem that people often have when they're teaching comics to kids is that they want to draw a thing that's already famous.
Mhm.
You know, they're
Mhm.
like, oh, I love Dogman. I want to draw Dogman. I love Star Wars. I want to draw Star Wars. And so much of the time, like talking to other cartoonists who do classes, they're just fighting that nonstop. They're just like, don't just copy something, make up your own thing. Because from an adult perspective, that seems pretty normal to us. Be like, I don't know, it's super guy, whatever. Like, it doesn't need to be brilliant, but you like intuitively understand that like you should come up with something new, and that's not
Mhm.
necessarily where their brain goes. So I started doing these stories, starting with this go-kart one, which was it was go-karts in space, basically, but where there was already a narrative begun, and then at the beginning of the story, it's very the like interactive elements are pretty low. It's like they're just reading a comic. Which I also liked doing because I drawing in front of people made me very self-conscious, but also I wanted them to see that I was an actual cartoonist. So I would usually incorporate my cat Peanut, who is if you're watching the videos behind me on the poster here
Oh, I see. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
in some way. And so there was kind of like a continuity that like this feels like a show or something that there is like I'm in it sometimes, Peanut's usually in it. So there's some characters, but also the story becomes something that they kind of take over by the end. It's sort of like you're riding a bike and you know your parents holding on to the back and then they let go and you keep going.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I also feel like for me, and you know, not everyone is the same in this, but it's hard for me to learn skills in a vacuum. Like I feel like I always thought I was bad at drawing backgrounds, and then I thought like, you know, for this comic I'm working on, the sense of place is really important. So I put a lot of effort into that, but I'm not thinking about like now is the part of my art journey where I become a background master. I'm thinking about
Right.
the story and that the story needs that good background. So now I'm going to move heaven and earth to solve the story problem. So, and I think that's like the beauty of comics to me is that they're a medium for stories. And so I think another sort of, in my opinion, wrong turn in a lot of the way comics are taught can be making it all about like now's the part where we learn inking, now's the part where we learn perspective, and being like, well, really, you're having to do all these things at once. And
Mhm.
and since we did that at CCS, because most of the work there is just having to make lots of comics. And so you're having to do all these things together,
Mhm.
not breaking them up into discrete skills. So the challenge for me was producing stories that were like diverse and complex, but not too complex, and would
Right.
sort of keep that sort of creative interplay in. And I did notice it more and more places, and it's not the only way to teach cartooning, you know. But I think it's a really great entry point because you don't have that sort of blank page syndrome, and there is a way where I think drawing comics is maybe more like learning to play an instrument than it is just like creative writing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
um, if you're literate, you can get a pencil and paper and be like, I don't know, write a story about your mom or your pet or something fantastical. And like, you might not write a great story, but probably you can manage something. But to do a comic, you have to be thinking about the story and how you're going to visually represent these things, how you're going to lay them out. It's just so many things to do at once. And I think it's expecting the average person of any age to be able to just take a blank piece of paper and start doing that is not a
Mm.
reasonable expectation. So thinking of like, how do you like build those skills so they learn how to do it almost without realizing that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And as somebody that has such insight into the medium, that makes sense. And it makes sense that you would go about it that way.
I
Yeah.
had a moment once where I was visiting a school. It was like I'd been invited to come to the school to promote some classes I was doing. And one of the teachers said, oh, it'd be great to have you come here sometime for our more advanced art students. And I didn't say anything, but I just felt like, I don't think this needs to be for the more advanced students. It actually might be better for the quote unquote less advanced students. As
Hmm.
it's also so interesting looking at um, students at different ages. I don't only teach kids, and seeing like the way that um, my kind of lower limit is usually like about seven, just because I'm like I want you to be able to like read and write and be
Hmm.
able to sit still for an hour. There are people who do comics with kids younger than that, and that is awesome. I haven't mastered that. But the difference from like a 7-year-old to a 12-year-old is a difference of like their personality or their practice, but their kind of ability to sequentially tell a story is pretty consistent. And
Hmm.
it's right around 13, 14, 15 that they start freezing up and really struggling with that. And then, so then the difference between a 14-year-old and a 45-year-old is not so great because I feel like they often have the same sort of issue where they're really struggling with like their self-consciousness, and they're realizing all these things they have to do at once. And is that even what a dog's face looks like? And how do you draw a building in perspective? And don't get me started on cars and those things that are just not problems to an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Kara Goldstein. She was on the inaugural episode
Oh,
of this
really? Oh, that's
podcast.
so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. You're gonna try to have another conversation with her at some point, I believe.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So curious about the book that you have coming up from Scholastics Graphics, as well as any other projects and any places where people can connect with you.
Sure. Yeah. So this book, it is funny because I suppose I technically shouldn't be promoting it yet because it comes out in a year. But
It's never too early.
yeah, yeah. So let's plant the seed, and then when you see it in a year or year and change, you can be like, oh yeah, I think I heard about this on that podcast in the hazy days of 2024.
That's right. And
Um,
I'll reshare it, of course, at
oh,
that
thank
point too. Yes.
you. Um, yeah. So I've kind of had some version of this story that I've been trying to crack for years, where I just kind of I feel like any sort of personal story, there's a tension of like there's aspects of this that are relatable to anybody, and there's hopefully aspects that are fairly unique, and that's why your version is worth telling, right? And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
felt like there were some dynamics in my family that were sort of hard to articulate to other people, or just didn't seem intuitive, like who I was close to and who I wasn't, and what have you. And I think a lot of that did just come from the sort of like relationships that developed once my parents split up and started dating other people, and then someone breaks up with someone or what have you. Like my narrative of those people is going to be different than either of my parents, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
um, Especially if they've broken up with someone. So I wanted to do a comic about my relationship with my dad and my former stepmom. And she was a philosopher like him. He's a philosophy professor, and she was kind of on that track. And then at a certain point, she was not enjoying teaching, and she was kind of spiraling out a bit. and then became a stripper. And now she is back to working in academia, and they're no longer together. But this sort of period where her life was kind of coming unglued was when I was a teenager and having some fairly typical teenage angst. But we had just kind of like an interesting dynamic where when we were younger, she was someone who was probably having that feeling that I did about Gastic and Kara's class, being like, I don't know how to deal with a kid this age. And so
Mm,
we were close. And then we had this little period where we were close. And then her and my dad split up. And so I worked on a comic about that for my thesis at CCS. And it was a funny experience because it literally was like when I was in the middle of making it, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever made. I am like, in the code of the matrix shaping this reality. This is my best art. I am loving this. And I've developed this style that's like different than my other stuff. And also I don't think anyone else does something that looks like this. I'm like all about this. And then I graduated and I was doing two comics for my thesis, and one of them was Smooth as Glass, which I can tell you about too if you'd like. That's a whole other wacky family story that is very unusual. But so I was working on that, and then this comic that I called The Noble Path that was about my stepmom. And that one, my thesis committee was basically like, good try. And I was like, huh, maybe it doesn't, like they were very positive about it overall. Like they had lots of little compliments, but I could pick up a vibe that it wasn't quite coming together for them.
mhm, mhm,
And um I got feedback from one of my film professors from undergrad, and he is someone who, even when I made some like terrible movies in undergrad, and he was like the only person who liked them, and it was like a very important thing to me to have someone that was, maybe objective is not the right word, but like outside of my immediate circle, who was like, yeah, this is, you have an interesting perspective, you're doing some cool stuff. And he was like, here's the 10 reasons this doesn't work. And I was like, crap, you're right.
mm, mhm, mhm,
And so I spent a lot of time trying to crack that. And I pitched a version of that story to a smaller publisher and got um not exactly a rejection, but an invitation to sort of like repitch it. And I felt like the issues they brought up were valid, but they were sort of things that I was like, I don't feel like I'm actually ready to tackle some of this. And part of it was that I don't. I think the part that was intuitively like, oh wow, to other people was that she was a stripper, and I didn't actually feel like at that moment I had a lot to say about that. It was like,
mm,
do
mhm,
you need Kane's hot take on sex workers? I don't know that you do, and I so I felt like I just needed to put a pin on that. I might come back to it because I think there's some interesting things there. But I also realized the story was kind of effectively two stories. There was one part that was the sort of younger kid experience of just dealing with a family coming apart and then reforming into something very different.
mhm,
Um, and then there was that sort of later story. And my parents split up when I was about 8. And so the version I had done for CCS had like a 10-year time jump in the middle of it. And there wasn't like a particular payoff to that. It was just like, here's things that happened. And then the other thing I was struggling with, and I feel like this is a way where maybe I have like a weird perspective on comics, is that I for me as a creator, not as a reader, but as a creator, I feel like um, first person narration is like, to borrow a phrase from Will Eisner, an accursed necessity.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
He said that about something else, but like it's something where like this is like if I'm doing a story about myself and I'm like, oh, I woke up this morning and I decided to put on this shirt and then I gotta get on that Zoom for that podcast, like that's fine, but I always feel like this is like, is this the most exciting use of this medium? And I
mm,
think
mhm,
people who do it better than me, and there's the sort of counter argument is that there's something really beautiful about the sort of like diary aspect of like you are seeing the representation of this world in the hand that drew it, and you're very aware of that hand. And I think there's something really cool about that. But that's not personally what interests me as much creatively. I wanted to tell this story, like I don't want to say like a movie, but like something where like it is dialogue that reveals story, not narration that reveals story.
mhm,
And as
mhm,
soon as you're doing that with real people, some people perceive it as like, I don't know if disingenuous is the right word, but like they see it as like it's like, well, is this your story to tell if you're like putting words in other people's mouths?
mm, mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Uh-huh.
So I felt like maybe I need to develop this more. Like basically, there's kind of like two tracks here. There's one where it's what you think of as an autobio comic, where there's first person narration explaining relationships, and you're quoting other people or paraphrasing them with their permission, hopefully. And it's very intentionally done to be representing people accurately. And then there's the kind of like autofiction version where this is like, the DNA of the real events and people is not hard to see, but it
Right,
is
right.
a fiction story. And that latter approach was really more what interested me, but also, potentially problematic in other ways. Um, and then I basically, I needed an editor. I needed some kind of like guidance in how to do that. Um, and then Larry Harris, who's one of the editors at the Nib, approached me because she said that the Nib was collaborating with this Oregon magazine called Oregon Humanities, and we both lived in Portland at the time.
Hmm.
It was pretty funny because she was very like charmingly forthright with me, where she was like, so I tried to like sell them on a bunch of famous people, and they were like, those people that you suggested don't currently live in Oregon, and that is invalid for our reasons. And so basically she was like, the timing of this is such that if you pitch something, it will almost certainly be the one to pick.
Always good to know. Always good to know
Yeah,
going
it
in.
was such a funny. It's like it's not like you were just such an amazing creator. It's just like I don't know. This is a practical problem to solve for other people, and being a problem solver is often the best way to get work. Um, and the theme of this magazine was union, and so I was like, okay, what could I do? I've done lots of short nonfiction for the nib. So I was like, I've done journalism. I could actually investigate something. So I was like, the big grocery store chain here, Fred Meyer, is trying to unionize right now, or the workers are trying to unionize. So maybe I could do something on that. And then I was like, Union, Soviet Union. And so there's a lot of weird Russia Pacific Northwest connections. So I
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
what the story about that. There's this famous Soviet aviator who came to or actually Vancouver, Washington, just over the border from Oregon. And Charles Lindbergh, we all care about a guy who has a plane times. This was like a defining story in this area. It's just this like weird story that people didn't really know. So like, that's maybe interesting, this magazine, right? And then I thought like, all right. Well, marriage is a kind of union, and I've been trying to crack some version of this family story, so I'll throw that in too. And I framed it as the story of reconnecting with my parents' exes because both my former stepmom and my mom's first boyfriend after her and my dad split up were people that were like not in my family life anymore, but I was able to find. And so um, I sent in those three pitches. And my recollection is O'Leary said, that last one is not my favorite, but we'll see what they say. I'm like, all right.
Hmm.
And that's the one
Hmm.
they picked. And I was like, great. So I've been trying to figure out a way to do this story for a while. I'm going to do it. And so that one, I did that more sort of like classic, um, not journal comic, but autobio comic approach, where
Hmm.
it starts with like a picture of me riding my bike and there's narration from me, and then it has some kind of like cute visual gimmicks. Or one of them gave me an action figure as a gift, and so I use this kind of like image of like action figure cases and their accessories as like a motif. Um, and I literally read it, like I mean, wrote it, and then I was not feeling confident in it. And I literally made my partner read it, and I was just like, I'm not looking for feedback exactly. I just want you to tell me, is this horrible? Like, is this something where I'm going to send this in and they're going to be like, what the heck did you just send me? Because I was just like not feeling great about it. And she was like, it's fine. Just send it. It's good. It's like, okay, that's all I
Hmm.
need. Thank you. Um, and it ended up when it was published, it was like by my tiny, not famous standards, a hit. Like it immediately got a big reaction. And it was funny to me because this was like right as COVID hit. And
Hmm.
so I felt like honestly embarrassed that every other story on the front page of the Nib was like something about the pandemic. And then there's just one that's like, I don't know, I like talked to my dad's ex and like it was okay. And like, are people going to connect with this? But people did. And almost immediately after that, like that day, I got an email from David Saylor at Scholastic inviting me to pitch something to them, perhaps
Nice, nice.
on that. And that was funny to me too because I had been trying to I'd been pitching middle grade books, and even I had one instance where an editor said, "I love this. Let me talk to the marketing people," and the marketing people didn't go for it. Like, stuff like that, where it was like, almost hitting but not hitting. And then the situation where I wasn't even trying to do a middle grade thing was the one that resonated with this editor. But I think it actually does make sense, and it maybe says something about me, but I sort of like I have really strong memories of being in late elementary school. I feel like maybe more than a lot of people do. Like I can, in my head, reconstruct it very vividly and talk about it very vividly. And so even though the audience of this story was not kids, I think perhaps, I don't want to assume what he read into it, but I think perhaps one could read it and see that that's an area where I can express myself well.
Hmm, hmm.
And
Nice.
so the story I ended up developing for them has like become pretty different from what I was doing originally, but I feel like to me it is very like resonant to the themes I was trying to engage with and the sort of like balancing of different family personalities and how you interpret people and whether you want to say this person's a good person in my life and this person's a piece of crap, or if you want to try to empathize with both people while still recognizing harms people do. And yeah, and it's really been really fun to do something that is like, I feel like I probably shouldn't talk about the specifics of the book too much at
Hmm,
this stage,
hmm.
but it's very dialogue based was really important to me. And I
Yeah,
do like there are certainly cartoonists who write incredible dialogue, but I feel like it is often not the emphasis. And you don't want to be too wordy in a comic, especially a comic for kids, but it was like I want these characters to have individual personalities expressed through their voices, and I want that to be what carries you through the story.
yeah, yeah,
And then another thing that I was thinking about was like, I think if you read it, you probably won't perceive the plot as overly complicated. Like it seems simple, but it was actually like a very like intricate process to make all these little puzzle pieces fit together. And if you watch movies for kids, I think that's pretty common that there's like the narrative sophistication of like a Pixar movie is pretty up there.
hmm,
Uh, but a lot of kids comics, I feel like that's there are certainly exceptions, but I feel like that's often like they kind of try to like really keep the story like linear and straightforward. And like I think kids are actually pretty sophisticated with story, even whatever their like reading level is. So
yeah. Agreed,
um,
agreed.
yeah, so I guess my hope is that it's something that is it is in a genre that I am like really excited to be working in with, brilliant people like Rena Telgemeier and Gail Galligan and people doing these character-based stories for kids about dealing with hard stuff. But I think I can say that it's doing some things that those books aren't too. At least that's what I'm telling myself, it's kind of recognizable as part of a thing, but also its own thing, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. Well, looking forward to seeing it out in the world and looking forward to the next steps that are part of your creative process.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
I will, of course, provide a link to your website. Any other spaces where people can connect?
um, Yeah, probably the best place to find me is my website, which is kanelynch.com, which
Hmm.
is Kanelynch. And I'm also Kane Icarus Lynch on Instagram and Blue Sky and technically still Twitter, but that became such a cesspool that I'm not really there anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely so. Same
Uh,
here.
Yeah. And in print, if you can get the issues of the Nib magazine, I did some comics for them that are some of my favorite things that I've done. And Guantanamo Voices, which came out from Abrams' book, it's from Abrams Books in 2020, is a wonderful book all around, and I'm pretty proud of what I contributed to that.
Yes, awesome, awesome. Well, anything that we've missed that you want to talk about before we go?
That's a good question because yeah, I could tell you about Smooth as Glass, my other adult graphic novel that you can read on my website, but I don't know if that's we're wrapping up. If that's too much of another kettle of fish, what do you think?
Totally up to you. If you'd like to mention it, I will be glad to give the space.
All right, I'll tell you about it. You can decide if you want to cut here to keep this keep this neat. I totally respect that. So in 2012, way back then, I saw someone on Facebook, a friend of mine, say that, hey, there's this folder called Other Messages, which I don't know if this, I don't think it works like this anymore, but in 2012, they had done this thing where if you weren't friends with someone and they messaged you on Facebook, it got
Hmm.
shunted to Other Messages. And so this friend said, I lost my wallet at a bar a year ago, and the person tried to find me, but I didn't get the message. And then I told my roommate, and he was like, "Yeah, the I can't remember what channel it was, but it was like yeah, like a TV channel wanted me to like host a show, and I missed it because they met Facebook messaged me." Like, oh man, it's like, well, probably I haven't lost my wallet, and probably no one wants me to host a show, but I'll see what's in this folder. And there was a message from someone saying, "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think maybe we're long lost relatives."
Ah.
And I had the instinct like this is probably a scam, right? You know, it
Hmm.
sounds
Hmm.
like a scam. But I read the message carefully and he said a name that I was like, oh wait, this might be for real. Because my dad had a brother that he never met, basically his dad had had a kid from a previous marriage and tried to keep it secret.
Ah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I was like, okay, so this actually makes sense. But even that is like that's kind of interesting, but I don't know, there's too much to that. Like, all right, so I guess we'll meet these other goofballs and see if they have similar noses to us or whatever. But it turned out to be a lot stranger than that because so my dad's brother was this guy named Dennis who has was cut off from his dad who was pretending he didn't exist, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And Dennis basically like tried to take that to the next level, and he got four different women pregnant while keeping them secret from each other, and then disappeared from all of their lives.
Wow.
And then because of the magic of the internet, all of these women and their children were able to find each other, and they were also able to find out what this erstwhile guy was up to. And he had changed his name to a nickname based on his favorite brand of t-shirt. And he had moved to Catalina Island on the California coast to become a pastor.
Wow.
And yeah. And the story was so strange. There were so many like threads to untangle where like my family's from the East Coast. So I grew up in California and I live in California now. But um my dad and his brother who didn't know each other existed both moved to California and they had these lives that kind of like shattered each other in some ways. And like my
Oh,
dad had
interesting.
gone to Bible college and was going to be a pastor, and then he ended up becoming an atheist philosophy professor. And his brother went to seminary to be a Catholic priest, and then ended up becoming running a weird Protestant church on an island. So it was just like a lot of strange stuff. And so then we concocted this plan to confront him at his church.
Hmm.
And I was like, I was working on a fiction graphic novel at the time, and I was like, you know what? I want to finish this story, but I gotta tell this other story. And it was something where I was like, I don't even know if my cartooning chops are up to this, but it's just such a compelling story that I have to tell it. And so I ended up partnering with this website called Beacon Reader, which was like a crowdfunded journalism website. And so I actually got like paid reasonably well to draw this graphic novel that took me 4 years. But at the end of it, I never published it in print, at least yet. So it's just this very strange story, which I feel like as an artist, I'm like, oh, there's so many ways I did this better. But I think the story itself is just really compelling. So
Definitely. Definitely
uh,
so.
if that sounds interesting to you, you can read it on kanelynch.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I love how you draw from life and take these kind of experiences that people might otherwise kind of go like, I don't even know what to do with that. And then you channel it in this really creative way. So just sending appreciation that way too. And that's a great message to anybody out there. There's the theme we didn't intend to get to,
You go.
which is people go through things and have these stories where it's like, what do I even do with that? And you've turned it into this positive way of creating.
Yeah, I do feel like that's sort of some of the most like interesting advice that I would offer to creators, I think, is that like you find those ways that your perspective is a little different, you know,
Hmm.
like there is also a practical level of like to make it professionally feel you need to find the ways that you fit into the field that exists, and that's also something that some people struggle with and that I've struggled with. But the flip side of that of being like you're not just a regular generic person. You are weird, even if you don't think you're weird, you know, like find those things in your perspective or your experience that are special and find the ways to share those, whether that's literally through autobio comics or metaphorically through fiction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kane, it's been a wonderful conversation. I hope to have you back sometime in the near future to have a follow-up at some
Yeah, I'd
point.
love to. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for having me.
absolutely. Anytime.